8. The Tank Graveyard of Asmara. The tank graveyard in Asmara, a city in the eastern African country of Eritrea, is a labyrinth filled with rows of rusted tanks, trucks, and other crashed vehicles. As you walk through this area, you might notice bits and pieces of ammunition, as well as metal plates with the letters CCCP, which stands for the USSR in the Cyrillic alphabet, stamped on them, scattered throughout the pathways and decorated with bundles of cacti that offer treats for local children that were brave enough to climb in and get them. But this place is much more than a collection of abandoned military equipment. It holds an unsettling historical significance as a lasting reminder of one of Africa's longest waged conflicts, the Eritrean War of Independence. This war lasted for 30 years, from 1961 to 1991. Eritrea fought to free themselves from the reigns of Ethiopian rule. During this bloody period, where 125,000 people lost their lives, Ethiopia, with support from the Soviet Union up north, had a formidable army equipped with tanks, trucks, cars, and machinery, much of which you can see in the tank graveyard to this day. Eritrean soldiers, on the other hand, had to use whatever they could find, even making sandals from old tires and relying on captured enemy weapons for defense. Despite the shocking difference in strength and resources of the two parties, Eritrea's determination and unwillingness to step down conquered, and they somehow destroyed the majority of the weaponry and vehicles sent by Ethiopia. Humiliated by the disappointing defeat, Ethiopia tried to brush the evidence of their losses under the rug by storing damaged equipment outside the capital city of Asmara, with the hope that the enemy wouldn't get a boost of morale from realizing just how many vehicles they took out. In 1991, when Eritrea finally came out victorious in the conflict, soldiers gathered all the military hardware they could and transformed it into what's now known as the Tank Graveyard. Today, the site has evolved into a public viewing space that a select few tourists who manage to travel to Eritrea can explore. To the local Eritrean population, it represents a source of pride as a symbol of their struggle for freedom. 7. The SS Gastopper. Under the water near the Irish coast, there's a military shipwreck that's worth its weight not in gold, but silver. The SS Gastopper was a British transport ship that operated in World War II. In February 1941, it was carrying a cargo worth £600,000 worth of silver, with hopes of transporting it to the United States for safety while the country was being bombarded during the Blitz. But the Gastopper didn't make it to its intended destination, since it was torpedoed by a German U-boat. The ship sank beneath the waves, taking the silver down with it. You'd think that considering how much silver was on the ship, as soon as it was safe to do so after the war, the British might try to recover the Gastopper bounty. But instead, it lay abandoned under the waves for decades, until in 2011, a group of US treasure hunters were able to locate the wreckage, 15,419 feet under the water, from the Irish coast. No wonder the British couldn't get to it. It seems like any chance of getting the silver is impossible, which is a shame given the value the metal would hold today. Back in 1941, the cargo had a value of £600,000. Today, it would be worth a staggering $210 million. 6. An armored vehicle on a Nebraska highway. In August 2020, traffic officials in Nebraska were baffled when they found an abandoned car on the side of the highway. It wasn't exactly something you'd expect to see, like a car or even a truck, but instead, blocking traffic was an armored vehicle. They were far away from any military bases, and the vehicle with its huge tracks wasn't exactly the best thing to speed down Interstate 80 inside of. So where exactly did it come from, and who did it belong to? It didn't belong to a private owner, and officials quickly worked out that it belonged to the South Dakota National Guard. Turns out that the armored vehicle was used in training drills and exercises conducted by the National Guard in California, so it was on its way back to South Dakota being hauled by a private company. But the driver and his vehicle and trailer were nowhere in sight. Thankfully, the abandoned armored vehicle was taken back to the South Dakota National Guard. but no one knows exactly why it was originally left there. What's the weirdest thing you've seen parked at the side of the road? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe while you're at it. 5. RAF Fokingham. If you head over to Lincolnshire in the UK, you'll find a treasure trove of abandoned military cars, enough to fill up an entire landing strip. RAF Fokingham was opened back in 1940 as part of the war effort for World War II. Ironically, when it was initially commissioned, there weren't any working vehicles at all on site. Instead, the airfield was full of fake airplanes and personnel, designed to serve as a decoy for the more important RAF Spitalgate, located not far from it. Over time, RAF Fokingham started being used as an actual airbase by the Royal Air Force and the US Air Force. Soldiers were even sent from Fokingham to Normandy to take part in the D-Day landings. They dropped into the battle via parachute. Once World War II concluded, tensions were still high with the start of the Cold War. As a result, Fokingham was reutilized as a ballistic missile base, with weapons ready and primed for the Cuban Missile Crisis that took place in 1962. But less than a year later, RAF Fokingham was officially decommissioned, and the land was sold off to private ownership, along with a heap of scrap vehicles that were left at the site. Over time, the vehicles, like a Caterpillar tractor, DUKW amphibious vehicle, and military refueling engines, have been overtaken by rust and nature, with many of them being swallowed up by shrubbery. Once upon a time, many of them were critical to the D-Day landings at Normandy in 1944, a moment that tipped the scales of World War II. Apparently, the vehicles are still being used for scrap and spare parts, but with how long they've spent rusting away, we're unsure what these historical war machines will serve. 4. The abandoned vehicles of the war in Afghanistan. The USA had a military presence in Afghanistan for over 20 years, from 2001 to 2021, to fight the Taliban and help the Afghan government. But what happened to the 20 years worth of vehicles left overseas? The US withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021 was quick and extremely chaotic, with troops leaving the country fast after the collapse of the ruling party they'd been helping. Coincidentally, many vehicles and pieces of infrastructure were left behind, along with others that had been given to the Afghan army. Of course, they weren't in pristine condition, and many were damaged by the retreating forces so they couldn't be used by the enemy. But it seems like the attempts to deliberately sabotage the $7 billion worth of vehicles left behind didn't go as well as the US forces first thought. In March 2023, 2 years after the US left Afghanistan, a picture was posted to Twitter showing rows and rows of US Army vehicles, including Humvees, mine-resistant armored cars, and more. The 300-odd vehicles had been taken over by the Taliban, and they'd spent the last 2 years repairing them to be operational again. 3. Milliondoll Point. Santo in Vanuatu was a critical base for the US while engaged in the Pacific theater of World War II. During their occupation of the island, the Americans brought in personnel, developed roads and infrastructure, and brought over items to make island living during war just a bit more bearable. In 1945, after the conclusion of the war, the US no longer needed to be in Vanuatu anymore, so the time came for them to withdraw and for many to return to civilian life. There was one problem though. The war stripped a lot of money and resources from the state, so transporting all of the assets back would be more trouble than it was worth. The army decided to only bring back the troops, leaving everything else behind. They later decided to sell the resources to the French, who had control over Vanuatu back then. They approached the governors of the island with an offer to buy the goods at a value of 6 cents on the dollar, a major discount. But the French knew exactly how desperate the US was to get rid of everything, so they turned down the deal, believing they would get everything for free later on once patience wore thin. The US was incredibly insulted when their offer was refused and decided that if they didn't want to buy them, no one could have them. under the cover of darkness, the US mobilized, ready to start a 2-day operation at Luganville Beach, dumping every last thing they brought into the water. This included small items like bottles of cola, all the way up to large vehicles and machinery like armored trucks and even bulldozers. It was all left to disappear under the waves. As the final cherry on the cake, they blew up and destroyed the jetty they built to drive the vehicles into the water. After the US left, the area gained a new name. Thanks to the immense value of the goods dumped there, the region became known as Milliondoll Point. To this day, visitors can spot junk left over from this period in history, and those able to dive or snorkel can spot the rusted and barnacle-covered remains of vehicles that were ceremoniously dumped there. 2. A Russian MiG-23. The island of Sakhalin is in the Sea of Okhotsk, around the northwest region of the Pacific Ocean. As a result of this, the area has been a subject of territorial disputes by both Japan and Russia, with both countries fighting over who actually owned it for centuries. In 1855, an agreement was finally reached, leading to the division of the island, with Japan taking control of the northern half and Russia having ownership of the south. This agreement continued up until Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, when Japan reasserted control over the southern region of the island. But the island of Sakhalin changed hands once again in 1945, when after World War II, the Soviet Union invaded Sakhalin, taking it over completely. During the period of Japanese rule over the southern side of Sakhalin, the army constructed an airfield known as Khiton. After the Soviet takeover, this facility was transformed into the Smernik Air Base, which housed 3 squadrons of Tupolev Tu bombers. It was also the base of Fighter Regiment 528. Over time, Fighter Regiment 528 brought in several types of aircraft to the site. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Smernik Fighter Regiment was disbanded around 1994. The base was closed down, and its MiG-23 ML aircraft were moved to Kbra on the Russian mainland, where they were held for storage and eventual dismantling. Not all of the aircraft were taken off of the island though. 2 planes remained abandoned. The first was a 2-seater MiG-23 once used for training, and the other was a single-seater. Although we don't know exactly where the 2-seater plane ended up, brave explorers can find tucked away in a hangar covered by a layer of snow what remains of the single-seater. It's in quite the sorry state, since the entirety of its nose is now missing, as well as its radar equipment. The cockpit's also been ripped off, as well as the landing gear, almost as if it had been partially scrapped already before Fighter Regiment 528 even left the island. On its side, the Soviet Red Star still remains proudly shining in place, although partially adapted with white and blue edging to signify the fall of the communist regime. 1. The Kbra Island tanks. Kbra Island in Puerto Rico is truly a tropical paradise, with clear waters and white sandy beaches. So the last thing you'd expect to see hidden in the corner of Flamenco Beach is a load of rusting World War II tanks. The story starts to make more sense when you realize that Kbra has had military ties for over a century. When Puerto Rico was given to the US by the Spanish in 1901, Kbra was signed off to the Navy by President Theodore Roosevelt. The Navy then used the land on Kbra that they'd been given to perform test landings and ground maneuvers, and even started bombing and target practice. Understandably, this usage angered the locals, especially since in 1969 the US Navy dropped bombs and fired missiles 228 days out of the year in preparation for Vietnam. That means they were disturbed by bombs basically every 2 out of 3 days. Unrest quickly grew, and the Navy soon tried to evacuate the people of Kbra from their homes. Instead, the locals rebelled, and for 7 months in 1970, they staged non-violent protests, sit-ins and blockades against the military usage of the island. Eventually, the military caved, and everything was scheduled to be moved from Kbra by 1975. Although the Navy had 5 years to clear their equipment that was used at the former testing site, it seems they weren't as thorough as you might expect. They left behind a host of items, many of which the local people of Kbra had to clean up themselves. Among these items the Navy left, though, were a load of World War II tanks which they'd been using for target practice, which were far too heavy to be moved. As a result, the tanks were left where they stood on Flamenco Beach, slowly being rusted away by the sea's salty water and gradually covered in colorful graffiti.
7. P5M Marlin Crash. Today, we're delving into a topic that will send shivers down your spine: missing nuclear weapons. It may be hard to believe, but there are a number of nuclear bombs and warheads unaccounted for in the world right now. While pinpointing the exact number is a challenge, it's safe to say that it's not a small figure. So, how many of these world-altering devices are out there? It's anyone's guess, as many countries aren't exactly forthcoming about misplacing nuclear weapons. Broken arrow is a term used by the US military to describe accidental incidents involving nuclear weapons, components, or warheads that, although serious, do not lead to the risk of nuclear war. These incidents encompass unintended nuclear explosions, non-nuclear detonations or fires involving nuclear weapons, and radioactive contamination. But it also includes loss or misplacement of nuclear assets during transportation, as well as the deliberate release or abandonment of a nuclear weapon or its components. Join us as we unravel the mysteries of lost nukes and the unsettling reality that some of them are still lurking in the shadows. On September 25, 1959, a P5M Marlin patrol aircraft operated by the U.S. Navy was conducting a routine mission off the coast of Whidbey Island, Washington. On board the aircraft was an unarmed nuclear depth charge, notable for lacking its fissile core, which is the essential component needed for a nuclear explosion. Unfortunately, though, during the course of this seemingly ordinary mission, disaster struck. The P5M Marlin encountered difficulties, leading to a catastrophic crash into Puget Sound, a body of water in the Pacific Northwest. This accident had dire consequences, not only for the aircraft, but also for the unarmed nuclear depth charge it was carrying. Despite extensive efforts to locate and recover the weapon, it was never found. The depths of Puget Sound concealed the nuclear depth charge, leaving its fate uncertain. While the immediate danger of a nuclear explosion was averted due to the absence of the fissile core, the loss of a military asset of this nature prompted thorough investigations and heightened security measures. Before we continue, if you're joining us for the first time, make sure you hit that subscribe button to unlock a treasure trove of incredible videos. And don't keep your thoughts to yourself. Drop a comment below and tell us what content you'd like to see next. 6. The Tybee Island Midair Collision. Dead of night on February 5, 1958. A U.S. Air Force Boeing B47 Stratojet bomber embarked on a simulated combat mission from Homestead Air Force Base in Florida. And it's important to note that it carried a formidable payload: a Mark 15 nuclear bomb weighing a staggering 7,600 pounds, 3,447 kilograms. At approximately 2 a.m., disaster struck when an F-86 fighter collided with the colossal B-47 bomber. The F-86's pilot, Lieutenant Clarence Stewart, managed to eject from his stricken aircraft, descending safely near Estill, South Carolina. Meanwhile, the damaged B-47 plummeted a terrifying 18,000 feet, 5,500 meters, from an altitude of 38,000 feet, 11,600 meters, before its seasoned pilot, Colonel Howard Richardson, regained control, defying the odds. Realizing the gravity of their predicament, the B-47's crew made a fateful request: to dispose of the nuclear bomb, lightening their load and mitigating the risk of a catastrophic explosion during an emergency landing. Permission was swiftly granted, and at an altitude of 7,200 feet, 2,200 meters, while hurtling through the night sky at approximately 230 miles per hour, 370 kilometers per hour, the Mark 15 bomb was released into the abyss below. And astonishingly, the crew didn't witness the anticipated explosion upon impact with the sea. In a remarkable display of airmanship, the crew managed to execute a safe landing at the nearby Hunter Air Force Base, just south of Savannah, Georgia. Debate continues to this day regarding the bomb's precise nature. Some sources depict it as a fully functional nuclear weapon, capable of unspeakable destruction if armed with a plutonium nuclear core. Others, however, suggest that it might have housed a dummy core, rendering it incapable of nuclear explosion but still packing a potent conventional punch. Regardless of its exact configuration, this colossal 12-foot behemoth, 4-meter, is thought to lie buried under many feet of silt at the bottom of Wausau Sound, off the coast of Georgia. The Mark 15 nuclear bomb bears the serial number 47782 and is frighteningly laden with 400 pounds, 181 kilograms, of conventional high explosives and highly enriched uranium. 5. Philippine CA4 Incident. The 1965 Philippine CA4 crash represents an alarming episode in the records of Cold War history. This incident occurred when a United States Navy Douglas A-4E Skyhawk attack aircraft, equipped with a nuclear weapon, plunged into the sea off Japan while operating from the aircraft carrier USS Ticonderoga. The unfortunate event transpired on December 5, 1965, during a routine training exercise, just 31 days after the USS Ticonderoga's departure from the U.S. Naval Base Subic Bay in the Philippines. The aircraft, a Douglas A-4E Skyhawk, was being transported from the No. 2 hangar bay to the No. 2 elevator when it was inadvertently pushed backward over the side, ultimately vanishing into the abyss. Tragically, not only did the aircraft meet its watery grave, but it was also accompanied by its pilot, Lieutenant Junior Grade Douglas M. Webster, as well as a formidable B-43 nuclear bomb. The depths of the Philippine Sea, estimated at 16,000 feet, 4,900 meters, concealed all traces of the aircraft, its valiant pilot, and the ominous cargo. This accident occurred approximately 68 miles, or 109 kilometers, from Kikai Island in Japan's Kagoshima Prefecture, raising concerns about the proximity of the lost 1 megaton, 1,000 kiloton H-bomb. But the U.S. Department of Defense didn't reveal this unsettling proximity until 1989, sparking diplomatic inquiries from Japan seeking detailed information about the incident. The 1965 Philippine CA4 crash reminds us of the potential calamities that loomed during the Cold War era, underscoring the necessity for rigorous safety protocols when handling nuclear weapons. The disaster also prompted the critical need for transparency in addressing such incidents. 4. USS Scorpion. The loss of the U.S. Scorpion remains a tragic and mysterious chapter in the history of the United States Navy. The submarine, which had been conducting training exercises and surveillance of Soviet naval activities, was en route to its home port in Norfolk, Virginia, when it disappeared in May 1968. Despite extensive search efforts involving numerous ships and aircraft, the submarine and its crew were declared presumed lost on June 5th. The Navy's efforts to locate the Scorpion were aided by mathematical consultants who employed Bayesian search theory, a method previously used in locating lost nuclear assets. Ultimately, the wreckage of the Scorpion was discovered on the seabed more than 9,800 feet, about 300 meters below the surface, about 400 nautical miles, 741 kilometers, southwest of the Azores. The observed damage to the Scorpion's wreckage provided insights into the submarine's fate. It appeared that the submarine had suffered implosion forces as it sank below its crush depth. The operations compartment of the hull had collapsed, and the submarine was broken in two by the massive hydrostatic pressure at such great depths. The torpedo room compartment showed minimal damage, with a missing hatch from the forward escape trunk, likely a result of water pressure during the implosion. The sail, which housed various equipment, had been ripped off, and the propulsion shaft came out of the boat. The engineering section had compressed forward into the hull due to the collapsed pressure, indicating the tremendous forces at play during the submarine's descent. The lack of radioactivity outside the wreck shows the nuclear fuel aboard the submarine remains intact, and no uranium in excess of levels expected from the fallout from past atmospheric testing of nuclear weapons has been detected during naval inspections. Likewise, the 2 nuclear-tipped Mark 45 torpedoes that were lost when the Scorpion sank show no signs of instability. The plutonium and uranium cores of these weapons likely corroded to a heavy, insoluble material soon after the sinking. The materials remain at or are close to their original location inside the boat's torpedo room. But if the corroded materials were released outside the submarine, their density and insolubility would cause them to settle into the sediment. Do you think there should be a worldwide cleanup of the world's oceans, one that includes every nation on the planet, in order to keep these nuclear weapons from causing further issues down the line? Let us know in the comments down below. And while you're at it, subscribe to the channel. 3. The Palomaris Incident unfolded on a clear morning on January 17, 1966. A serene Spanish village called Palomaris was rudely interrupted by the calamity that ensued when 2 aircraft collided mid-air, sending a cataclysmic shower of destruction over the tranquil town. The tragic event began with a Spanish shrimp fisherman who witnessed a strange sight, a misshapen white object descending from the sky. The mysterious object, trailing something beneath it, glided silently toward the Alborian Sea before vanishing beneath the waves. Simultaneously, in Palomaris, residents looked up to see 2 massive fireballs hurtling toward their town. The collision had occurred between a U.S. Air Force B-52 bomber and a KC-135 tanker plane. This catastrophic event unleashed chaos upon the village. The force of the impact caused buildings to tremble, sent shrapnel plummeting toward the ground, and even resulted in body parts falling from the sky. In the weeks following the collision, the true extent of the disaster became apparent. It was revealed that 4 B-28 thermonuclear bombs were on board the aircraft, and 3 of them had been recovered on land. However, 1 bomb had vanished into the depths of the Mediterranean Sea. The missing bomb presented a grave concern due to its 1.1 megaton, 1,100 kiloton warhead, possessing the explosive power equivalent to 1.1 million tons, 1.1 billion kilograms of TNT. The urgency to locate and recover this lost nuclear device was paramount, and luckily it was eventually recovered intact from the Mediterranean after a search lasting 2.5 months. 2. K2-19. In October 1986, the world bore witness to a dramatic and potentially catastrophic episode in the depths of the ocean. The Soviet Union's 667A Project Yankee-class submarine, K2-19, embarked on what seemed like a routine patrol off the coast of Bermuda. But little did anyone know that this mission would turn into a perilous ordeal that could have had grave consequences during the height of the Cold War. K2-19, under the command of Captain Igor Britanov, set sail from Gadizyevo, Russia, and headed west toward the eastern coast of the United States for a covert Cold War-era patrol. On board the submarine were 16 R-27 nuclear missiles and 2 nuclear reactors ready to execute its classified mission. However, just shy of 700 miles, or 1,127 kilometers northeast of Bermuda, disaster struck. An explosion occurred in one of the missile tubes when a seal ruptured, allowing seawater to trickle inside, where it mixed with the missile's liquid fuel, producing potentially explosive and toxic nitrogen dioxide gas. Then, in a desperate bid to avert catastrophe, Captain Britanov ordered the submarine to rise to a higher depth. Unfortunately, though, the ruptured hull opening let in more water, causing the sub to sink even deeper. Stabilizing the submarine to halt its descent, Captain Britanov ordered the evacuation of most of the crew to a nearby towing ship. Tragically, 3 sailors lost their lives in the initial explosion, while Lieutenant Nikolai Belikov and Senior Seaman Sergei Preminin, who heroically shut down the reactors, were unable to escape. As the Soviets tried to salvage the situation by towing the damaged K2-19 back to Russia, tragedy struck once more. The tow rope snagged, and the submarine plunged 5.5 miles, 9 kilometers to the ocean floor, resting there for eternity. In the aftermath of this calamity, rumors swirled. Some suggested that the K-219 had collided with the United States Navy submarine Augusta, although the Navy vehemently denied this. Others speculated about mysterious forces in the vicinity of the Bermuda Triangle. Charges of negligence were initially brought against Captain Britanov, but were later dropped. However, he was discharged from the military in 1987. In subsequent deep-sea expeditions in 1986 and 1987, the Soviet Institute of the Sea discovered the K-219 broken in half on the ocean floor, with empty missile tubes hanging open. And to make matters worse, K-219's full armament of nuclear weapons was lost along with the vessel. 1. B47 Stratojet disappearance. On March 10, 1956, an incident unfolded in the skies over the Mediterranean Sea that would plunge the United States into a tense and frantic search operation. A B47 Stratojet, an advanced strategic bomber of the time, was on a fateful mission that would take an unexpected turn. The B47 Stratojet wasn't just an ordinary aircraft. It carried a cargo of immense consequence: nuclear weapons material. This mission was part of the U.S. Air Force's efforts to maintain a robust nuclear deterrence strategy during the Cold War. However, on that ill-fated day, something went terribly wrong. As the B-47 soared over the Mediterranean, it mysteriously vanished from radar screens, leaving a growing sense of unease and anxiety among military personnel and officials. The aircraft, equipped with nuclear weapons, had seemingly disappeared into thin air. The disappearance set off a massive search and rescue operation, involving aircraft, ships, and submarines scouring the vast expanse of the Mediterranean Sea. The stakes were unimaginably high, as the loss of nuclear weapons material could have far-reaching and dire consequences, including the risk of falling into the wrong hands. So, for days, search teams combed the waters, desperately hoping to locate any trace of the missing B-47 and its potentially catastrophic cargo. The operation was carried out secretly, as the U.S. government was keenly aware of the need to prevent public panic and international alarm. But despite the exhaustive efforts of the search teams, the B-47 Stratojet and its nuclear payload remained elusive, shrouded in mystery and uncertainty. The disappearance of the aircraft and its deadly cargo left many questions unanswered and raised concerns about the security and safety of nuclear weapons during transportation. In the end, the fate of the B-47 and its nuclear payload would remain a mystery, lost to the depths of the Mediterranean Sea. And while the incident didn't lead to a nuclear event, it served as a reminder of the inherent risks and vulnerabilities associated with the possession and transportation of nuclear weapons. The unsettling truth about missing nuclear weapons challenges our understanding of global security. And while Broken Arrow incidents might not lead to nuclear war, they do reveal the fragility of our control over these world-altering devices. The mysteries of the lost nukes and their lurking presence highlights the grave responsibility we bear in safeguarding our world from the unimaginable consequences. How do you think these missing nuclear weapons will affect our planet, including the people who live on it in the future?
World War II was a conflict that saw fighting all over the globe, from the Pacific to Europe to Africa. Millions of people were killed, and some of the secrets of World War II are still buried to this day. But over recent decades, some incredible discoveries have been made. You won't believe some of these stories, so buckle up and get ready. The Adriatic Sea Bombers. Located in the Mediterranean between Italy and Croatia, the Adriatic Sea is a burial ground that's home to 5 B-24 Liberator bombers. The planes were all presumed lost during World War II. It was about a half a century later in 2002 when it was reported that the missing US bomber planes were finally discovered in the Adriatic Sea. The B-24 Liberator was a heavy bomber that could hold a max of 10 men. The bombers could reach speeds of up to 297 miles per hour and were equipped to hold up to 5,000 pounds of bombs. These were the most produced heavy bombers made for the war, and they played a critical role in bombing German targets. But the crew of the B-24s referred to as the plane as the Flying Coffin because of its singular entry point located at the rear of the plane. This was the only exit available in an emergency, and crews claimed it was almost impossible to escape the B-24 in dangerous situations. The missing bombers spotted in the Adriatic Sea were more than likely stationed at a base not too far away in Foggia, Italy. We really don't know much about the mission they were on when they disappeared. Also, we don't have any reliable information about the crew that were on the planes when they went down during their final operation. A research team from the University of Delaware and the Pentagon worked together diligently to find the missing B-24s. Joining the mission was a group of experienced researchers and divers from Croatia. With their help, unmanned vehicles were sent underwater to explore 24 square miles in the Adriatic for the wreckage of the B-24 bombers. After a few weeks of searching, 3 of the planes were located. Researchers were able to get the plane numbers off the wreckage in order to identify them as the missing B-24 Liberator bombers. The 5 planes had around 23 men on board when they went missing. The soldiers had been listed as missing in action for over 80 years. This isn't the only discovery that could possibly be made in the Adriatic either. It's believed that some other planes, possibly more B-24s, also crashed into the Adriatic and were never found. A mission leader involved in the Adriatic Sea search was the co-founder of Project Recover. This is an organization dedicated to finding and repatriating the 80,000 missing U.S. servicemen that were listed as missing for conflicts dating all the way back to World War II. The Adriatic Sea discovery of the B-24 Liberator bombers was one of the biggest finds made by Project Recover. Lost artwork. During World War II, Nazi Germany looted the European continent and confiscated about 650,000 pieces of artwork. They were taken from museums, art galleries, and even private residences. The artwork was typically stolen from Jewish citizens. This also included the looting of personal belongings. Sadly, some of these precious pieces were never found or saved. Some were destroyed during bombings, while others were simply lost and forgotten. A few of the works came from some very notable artists like Raphael, Vincent van Gogh, and Rembrandt. To this day, some valuable and famous pieces of art are still missing from the catalogs. So why did the Germans decide to steal a bunch of art? The plan was to create the Führer Museum in Adolf Hitler's Austrian hometown. Some of the pieces would be placed on exhibit, but not every piece of artwork was stolen for this plan. Pieces were deemed degenerate and were sent to be destroyed. This even included books, Torahs, or the Hebrew Bible, and various important cultural documents. Some were destroyed, but others were set aside for another day, possibly by Germans looking to build their own collection or to find a way to make money on the black market. Others just disobeyed orders because they couldn't bring themselves to destroy items of such importance. The United States learned of the German looting and decided to create the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Program, or MFAA. The MFAA was built on both male and female scholars, architects, museum curators, and more from 14 different nations. Their mission was to save pieces of artwork, artifacts, and other significant items taken by Nazi Germany. They were even sent into some combat situations, and sadly, 2 members of the MFAA were killed during the conflict. Salzwelten-Altaussee was an Austrian salt mine that was home to about 8,000 stolen items by the Nazis. The mine was a perfect spot for hiding stolen art since it was 2,600 feet below ground and had a maze of tunnels. This was a safe location fortified against bombing, plus the mine had a cool temperature, which kept everything properly stored. The MFAA eventually learned of this location, and when they arrived, they discovered that the entrance to the mine had been blasted by explosives. They had to dig through the rubble to get to the items stored inside the mine. An Atlas Obscura article detailed what was saved by the MFAA. By July 1945, it was reported that 6,577 paintings, 230 drawings and watercolors, 954 prints, 137 sculptures, and 129 pieces of arms and armor had been removed from the mine. The success of the MFAA was incredibly impressive. They saved 5 million items from being lost forever. The The pieces were later returned to their rightful collectors. This is simply amazing considering the MFAA was given a shoestring budget. Plus, they even went to the front lines of battle to save some items from destruction. But that's not the end of the stolen artwork story. More discoveries were made long after the MFAA was formed. It was September 2010 when a train traveled from Switzerland to Germany. A German customs officer did a check of the passengers on board and met an odd but nervous man on the train. The man was named Rolf Nicholas Cornelius Gerlit, and the officer decided to detain him due to his unusual behavior when questioned about the purpose of his trip from Switzerland to Germany. Gerlit admitted that he was visiting an art gallery. Rolf Nicholas Cornelius Gerlit was also searched by the customs officer, and it was discovered that he was traveling with 12,000 in euros. The customs officer immediately flagged Gerlit in the system, and from there, a dark secret was uncovered. Gerlit was actually the son of Hildebrand Gerlit, a man who was the curator of the artwork stolen by the Nazis during World War II. Authorities decided to look into Rolf Nicholas and realized that he was living in a small, modest apartment in Munich, Germany. Something else caught their attention that day too. Gerlit was under suspicion for tax evasion. 1 year after the train incident, a search warrant was obtained for the man's home, but something strange happened. Authorities simply decided not to do anything. While law enforcement did nothing, Gerlit sold a painting called The Lion Tamer by Max Beckmann for over $1 million. The money was split between the descendants of Alfred Fletchheim. A bit of investigating led to the discovery that Alfred Fletchheim sold the Lion Tamer to Gerlit's father during the 1930s. It's believed that this may have been a sale where Fletchheim had no other choice. Fletchheim was Jewish, and the Nazis were notorious for stealing art and other items from Jewish families all over Europe. If Gerlit had one painting to sell, then there could be many more inside of his apartment. A search warrant was finally executed in early 2012. What they found was unbelievable. In Gerlit's apartment were 1,400 framed and unframed works of art from artists like Picasso, Matisse, and Renoir. All of the artwork was stacked in a huge, disorganized pile. Also, the home was filled with cans of expired food and the balcony door was blocked off. The artwork was quickly confiscated and hauled away to a facility. Some Jewish families in Germany asked if the origins of the artwork could be determined. This meant that there would have to be an investigation into the history of the ownership of some pieces due to the looting that took place in the 1930s. Laws in Germany are confusing and complicated when it comes to this matter. Compliance is voluntary, and there is a 30-year statute of limitations when it comes to situations like this. At the time of this video, Gerlit was not charged with a crime, and his artwork is still in a warehouse while the status of these works is unknown. What are your thoughts on the looted artwork that was taken during World War II? Let us know in the comments below, and if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel. The mass graves. In 2022, Polish investigators made a horrific discovery in the Bieludi Forest. About 100 miles north of Warsaw, the investigators found 2 mass graves that held an astonishing 17 tons of ashes from World War II. In total, around 8,000 Poles were executed by the Nazis between 1940 and 1944. Those who died were prisoners of the Soldau Nazi German prisoner camp, which was near the town of Zaldło. The camp held 30,000 people that were mainly Jewish citizens, Polish elites, or resistance fighters. Investigators were shocked once they realized that those that were executed were cremated. After this, their remains were pulverized into ash. The ash was then buried in 2 pits that were about 10 feet deep. Apparently, the Germans planted trees on top of the pits to try and hide the mass grave. Polish authorities would have pursued criminal charges if anyone who worked as prison guards at the camp decades ago were still alive. A symbolic grave was recently placed on the site, and a memorial service was held in honor to the fallen victims. Sadly, another mass grave was discovered in 2009 in northern Poland. Construction workers from the town of Malbork were laying down a foundation for a new hotel when they spotted human remains peeking out of the dirt. The bodies were exhumed and the initial count was set at 60 people. The manner in which the bodies were buried stunned officials. One of them stated, "These peoples were buried in an appalling and inhuman manner." When the work was finished, there were 1,800 to 2,000 total remains discovered, including those of small children. Malbork saw fierce fighting back in 1945 as German soldiers retreated from the area and Soviet soldiers advanced further inside. There were German citizens living in the region as well during that time. What frustrated investigators and officials was that nothing was buried with the people, like personal belongings or identification. At the time of the making of this video, no updates have been given concerning the victims. Germans were living in Malbork, and it is possible that they were executed by the Soviet military when they entered the town. There's been an attempt to locate eyewitnesses to the horrific event, but no one fitting the description has come forward or been located. But those that were exhumed were finally given proper burials. An official added, "We are looking for witnesses or sources of information. We hope to find some leads because we still know virtually nothing about the mass grave and the victims." Another mass grave was uncovered in Brest, Belarus in 2019. Construction workers there unearthed the remains of 1,200 people who were Jewish citizens. The victims were forced to live in the city's ghetto from 1941 until 1942. Brest was a part of Poland at one point, but is now part of Belarus. It was an area occupied by Germany during World War II. This is unfortunately yet another discovery linked to the horrors of the Holocaust. Sadly, the victims in this case also included women and children who were brutally executed by the Nazis. While the grave was discovered in 2019, it was reported that a Brest newspaper reported that a mass grave was in their town about 20 years prior. The citizens may not have known the exact location of the grave or the number of people that were buried inside, though. A public funeral ceremony was held for those who were exhumed, and a large portion of the local community attended. The Israeli ambassador to Belarus was also in attendance that day to pay their respects. The USS Johnston. The deepest shipwreck of a World War II vessel was located in 2019. The USS Johnston, a U.S. Fletcher-class destroyer that was built in Seattle back in 1942, was spotted in the Pacific Ocean. It sank during a battle with the Japanese fleet in the Battle of Leyte Gulf. This battle happened in 1944 when the Allied forces were busy liberating the Philippines from Japanese control. The USS Johnston was one boat in a small fleet of ships that were positioned in Leyte Gulf outside of the Philippines. Their job was to protect U.S. troops landing in the country. Without ships like the USS Johnston to protect the troops, they would have been easy targets for the enemy fleet. The Johnston and the other ships were eventually attacked by a much larger Japanese fleet. In that Japanese fleet was the famed Yamato, a ship that was one of the deadliest, most heavily armored, and largest vessels of its time. The Johnston and its fellow ships faced 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers in the battle. The Johnston and the other U.S. vessels in the Leyte Gulf were hopelessly outgunned, but that didn't stop them from standing up to the Japanese. In the end, the USS Johnston was sunk, but it is remembered as a ship that fought bravely on the seas in an epic battle with the Japanese. In the end, the US and their allies defeated the Japanese forces in World War II, taking another step closer to victory. Interestingly enough, the Battle of Leyte Gulf was the last major naval battle of the war. But the story of the Johnston intrigued some people enough to search for the remains of the ship underwater. When it was finally located, the USS Johnston was about 4 miles under the ocean, making it the deepest shipwreck from World War II that's ever been discovered. What amazing stories from World War II would you like us to cover in upcoming episodes? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.